Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot into the warm, dusty heart of ancient Mesopotamia where the air smells faintly of clay and fermented date wine, and where the streets hum not with the growl of engines, but with the soft bray of donkeys and the chatter of market sellers. You probably won't survive this without at least 3 questionable snacks, and maybe a mild case of heat stroke, but it's worth the risk. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, post your location and local time in the comments there. Something magical about knowing who else is sharing this moment with us from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into a narrow alley framed by mud brick walls that still glistened faintly from last night's rain. Beneath your feet, the packed earth is uneven, and every few steps you have to sidestep a puddle reflecting the pale blue of the morning sky. The market opens in a slow wave, first the low murmur of voices, then the creak of wooden stalls being unfolded, and finally the clinking of bronze weights on scales. A woman in a linen tunic gestures to you from behind a table crowded with flat, round loaves. She tells you they remade with barley softened with sheep's milk and sweetened with a dusting of date syrup. You hand over a small, sun-warmed clay token, one of the early forms of currency here. Long before coins, the bread is still warm, and when you bite into it, the sweetness lingers longer than you expect. In the next stall, a bearded scribe with ink-stained fingers is scratching signs into a wet clay tablet. He's recording a debt, muttering under his breath, as if the numbers themselves are unruly children. You recognize the wedge-shaped impressions cuneiform, one of the earliest writing systems in human history. Historians still argue whether it was invented primarily for trade or for the temple's bureaucratic needs. But here in the market, it's as much a tool for gossip as it is for accounting. The smell changes as you walk, moving from bread and honey to the sharp tang of tanned leather. A cobbler is bending over a sandal, sewing the strap with a bronze needle. His hands are calloused, but his voice is smooth as he tells you the leather came from a cow raised along the Euphrates, where the grass grows sweeter. Just beyond him, 2 boys are laughing as they roll clay marbles across the street. One marble is slightly chipped, revealing a lighter color inside. River clay, one of them explains proudly, though you suspect he's just making it up to sound impressive. A shout pulls your attention toward a spice seller. His goods are stacked in narrow-necked jars, ground coriander, sesame, and an earthy powder you don't recognize. He offers you a pinch on your palm. It's bitter, then strangely floral. He claims it keeps away insects and, if taken with goat's milk, cures a headache. You're not convinced. Near the edge of the market, you pause at a stall where a young woman is selling small clay amulets shaped like fish. She tells you they're for good luck in fishing, though judging by the cracked surface of a few, they've been fired in a very uneven kill. Still, you take one. It fits neatly in your palm, and the soft grooves where the scales were carved feel oddly soothing. Overhead, the sun climbs, and the hum of the market deepens. In the distance, you can see the stepped layers of a ziggurat rising above the rooftops, its shadow stretching like a sundial over the city. A procession of priests in clean white linen passes by, their heads shaven, carrying baskets of bread toward the temple. Some say these offerings keep the gods content. Others whisper they're simply feeding the temple workers. As you drift toward the city gates, a merchant calls out an odd bargain offering, not goods, but the service of a trained storyteller. For a few silver shekels, he promises, you can have your family's history recited in the temple courtyard, complete with flute accompaniment. You're tempted, not just for the novelty, but for the strange idea that memory here is something you can buy and sell. Behind you, the market doesn't end so much as fade. The voices grow quieter, the air loses the heavy scent of spices, and the street widens into a road lined with fields of barley swaying under the midday sun. Somewhere beyond, another city waits, another market hums, but for now, you keep the amulet in your hand, the taste of barley bread on your tongue, and the faint baked scent of clay in your nose. The light changes as you wander from the fertile fields back into the land of stone and shadow. Your sandals scuff along a dusty path, and before you rises the immense outline of the Great Pyramid at Giza, its limestone blocks catching the sun like a wall of mirrors. The air is dry, and the wind carries tiny grains of sand that sting your cheeks, though you imagine worse things could sting you out here. You probably wouldn't last very long in this heat without someone fanning you with palm leaves, but then again, who would? At the pyramid's base, you notice not solemn silence, but noise workers laughing, shouting, trading crude jokes as they drag heavy limestone blocks along slick mud ramps. The myth of slaves whipped into silence fades. The truth feels closer to a chaotic construction site. One man pauses, scratches something on the wall of a nearby storage chamber with a lump of red ochre. When you step closer, you squint at the crooked hieroglyphs. It's not a prayer, not a grand proclamation, but graffiti, something like the drunkards of Menkor, a nickname for his crew. Scholars still chuckle over these inscriptions, debating whether they were playful pride or sly protest. Historians still argue whether such graffiti was tolerated as a harmless release or quietly scrubbed away when found. The sound of stone on stone grinds endlessly. A block slams into place with a hollow thud, and the foreman bellows like an irate schoolteacher. Sweat streams down faces, soaking linen skirts until they cling. Yet, despite the heat, there's rhythm. Ropes tighten, voices chant in unison, bodies lean forward, and the block shifts. You catch yourself nodding along to their cadence, the same way you might hum to music at the gym. Though, let's be honest, you'd probably last 2 minutes before faking a back injury. Around the pyramid, small mud brick houses cluster in a workers' village. You wander through narrow alleys where pots of lentil stew bubble, and the smell of roasted fish drifts lazily through the air. Children dash barefoot past you, their laughter ringing against the stone walls. A woman kneels beside a clay jar, pulling up cool water with a reed dipper. She offers you some, and it tastes faintly of minerals, sharp and grounding. Inside one hut, you glimpse a wall, painting nothing polished for the afterlife. Just simple sketches of a cat chasing a goose. It's sloppy, endearing, the kind of doodle you'd expect to find on a bored student's notebook. Archaeologists were startled when they uncovered similar scrawls, proof that even in the shadow of eternity, people still wasted time doodling. As the sun climbs higher, you drift back toward the pyramid's massive face. You press your palm against the stone. It's hotter than you expect, as if the rock itself has swallowed the fire of the desert. You imagine workers carving each block with copper chisels, their muscles aching, their patience wearing thin. Yet the pyramid grew, stone by stone, until it dominated the horizon like a frozen mountain. A shadow crosses your path, an enormous bulk of the Sphinx, lying in patient silence, half buried in sand. Its expression seems both stern and faintly amused, as though it knows secrets you could never guess. Some scholars argue it was originally a lion's body, given a human face much later. Others insist it has always been a guardian, its gaze fixed on eternity. You step closer, feeling its gaze follow, and wonder what it has witnessed across the millennia. Near the Sphinx's paw, you stumble across another piece of graffiti scratched deep into stone. Khufu's friends were here. It hits you that monuments of grandeur often double as oversized bathroom walls, hosting names carved by hands that wanted to be remembered, even if only for a moment. You can't help but smirk. Maybe people haven't changed as much as we think. Behind you, the desert stretches wide, shimmering in the heat. The wind whispers through the stones, carrying the echoes of workers' songs long silenced. You close your eyes and almost hear them again, their jokes, their frustrations, their pride carved into rock. The pyramids stand as symbols of immortality, but what lingers most in your mind is the laughter scrawled into hidden chambers, the doodles of cats, the careless proof that humanity, even in the grandest of endeavors, is always delightfully ordinary. You step back, sand crunching underfoot, the pyramid rising above like a silent tide of stone. The graffiti stays hidden in your memory, brighter than the polished limestone, proof that eternity is built not only by gods and kings, but by people who took breaks, doodled cats, and gave their work gangs silly names. The sea air tastes different from desert wind, saltier, heavier, the kind that sticks to your lips like fine sugar you didn't order. You stand at the edge of a Mycenaean harbor, where ships bob gently against wooden posts, their hulls creaking as if muttering secrets. Nets dry in the sun, their temps of seaweed drifting across the pier, while bronze blades glint faintly on the belts of men unloading amphorae. The harbor is alive with the pulse of trade, every deal struck with half suspicion and half smile. You think about haggling for a jar of olives. But let's be honest, you'd probably pay triple after one round of bartering. On the deck of a ship freshly arrived, two sailors argue about whether the tin inside the amphora really came from far-off Britain or just the hills of Anatolia. Their voices rise, one swearing by Poseidon's beard, the other by his mother's stew. Historians still argue about the Bronze Age collapse, about whether trade routes like this unraveled because of war, famine, or sheer exhaustion of resources. But for now, in this harbor, everything looks alive, busy, precariously balanced, like a tower of amphorae stacked too high. The smell of pitch and fish mixes in the air, and you pass a group of merchants clapping each other on the back. They're dressed in tunics dyed faint shades of purple, nothing like royal Tyrian, but enough to suggest they're doing fine for themselves. One leans over to show you a small bronze dagger with a hilt inlaid with ivory. He insists it was once blessed in a temple, but judging by the chipped edge, it's been used more for cutting rope than for divine ceremony. Further down the quay, a boy about 12 years old, skin browned by sun, hair a salt-tangled messits, cross-legged, carving a toy boat from driftwood. He tells you his father sails to Crete with shipments of olive oil, though he suspects the man prefers staying in port to gamble at dice. He grins, showing a gap where his front tooth should be, then shrugs as if to say, "Men are men." You almost laugh, but he's not wrong. The clamor grows louder. Near a stall, where jars of wine are stacked like precious treasure. A merchant holds one up, swirling the liquid inside, promising it's from the best vineyard in Thebes. You taste it when offered a rough kick at first, then a soft sweetness that lingers. It's not bad, though you imagine by the third cup it could taste like seawater, and no one would notice. Beside the wine cellar, a woman spreads out bolts of wool dyed deep red, claiming the sheep were fed on secret herbs to make the fibers stronger. You run your fingers along the fabric. It's soft, warm, and smells faintly of lanolin. Behind her, a dog naps lazily in the sun, twitching as if dreaming of chasing goats. The harbor holds its quirks too. A grizzled old sailor swears loudly that the bronze nails holding his ship together came from Atlantis itself. Everyone nearby rolls their eyes, but he persists, slapping the side of his vessel with a hollow thud. Fringe or not, such tales spread like salt in water. Everybody knows it's nonsense, but the telling is half the fun. Closer to the water, fishermen mend nets, their hands quick, their voices humming a tune older than the city's walls. The rhythm makes you drowsy, almost hypnotic, as if the nets themselves are weaving dreams of fish yet to be caught. One fisherman pauses to show you a strange shell polished smooth by the sea. He says it's lucky, though he also says that about nearly everything he owns. A sudden shout draws your gaze to the far pier, where two men argue over the weight of a tin ingot. One insists it's shaved down, the other swears he's honest as Athena's owl. They call for a scale, and a crowd gathers, eager for drama. You drift closer, not because you care about tin, but because human arguments are better entertainment than most amphitheater plays. The scale tips slightly off balance, and the accused merchant throws his arms in the air, swearing divine vengeance on faulty equipment. The crowd bursts into laughter, and even you can't help but Grintrade is theater, and every port is its stage. The sun begins to sink, staining the sea with gold. Sailors light small oil lamps along the docks, their flames flickering against the gentle rise and fall of the waves. You breathe in the briny air, hearing the last calls of gulls circling overhead. The harbor quiets, but doesn't sleep. Someone will always be counting jars, whispering deals, or spinning tales until dawn. You step back from the bustle, the murmur of the market echoing in your ears. You hold the memory of the boy's carved boat, the old sailor's Atlantis nails, the laughter over a crooked scale. The Mycenaeans may vanish in time, their palaces crumble, their tablets shatter. But tonight their harbor thrums with life bronze, banter, and the sea's eternal whisper. The air shifts once more, heavier now with the faint perfume of river reeds and the steady trickle of water against stone. You find yourself standing at the banks of the Nile, just as dawn spills across the horizon. The sky softens into pink and orange, mirrored in the river's slow, glassy surface. Reed boats, long and narrow, glide silently past, their sails catching the early breeze. Fishermen cast their nets with practiced ease, the arcs cutting through the light like silver ribbons before sinking with a quiet splash. You pull in a breath. The smell is part fresh water, part mud, part fish, and entirely Egyptian. On the eastern shore, temple columns loom, painted once in vibrant colors that now fade under the relentless sun. Priests, wrapped in crisp linen, step carefully along the causeway, their sandals whispering on stone. They carry trays of bread, onions, and small jars of beer as offerings. Their shaved heads gleam, and their voices rise in chant, low and rhythmic. the kind that rolls in your chest like distant thunder. You can't make out the words, but you can feel the cadence. A ritual carried out every single morning for centuries. Historians still argue whether the rituals were believed to literally feed the gods or if they were more symbolic, nourishing the community's sense of order and stability. Either way, it seems to keep the priests very busy and probably a little tired of bread. You step closer to the temple precinct, where astronomer priests are setting up tall poles and stretching cords across the ground. Their purpose is not construction, but orientation. They track the stars, aligning sacred buildings with Sirius or Orion's belt, depending on who's paying for the temple. One priest mutters that the star Soptit, what you'd call Sirius, heralds the flood season. Another insists its timing shifts with divine whim. Scholars today still bicker over whether Egyptian star charts were deeply scientific or mainly ceremonial decorations, but standing here, under the clear dawn sky, you sense the precision in every measured glance upward. By the riverbank, women squat with baskets of laundry, beating linen against smooth stones. The slap of wet fabric punctuates the morning, a domestic percussion against the temple's chant. A child giggles as a fish flops free from a basket, slipping back into the water like a slick, triumphant escape artist. The women laugh too, shaking their heads. Some things never change. Fish always win at least once. Nearby, a potter kneels beside a turning wheel. His clay spins, his fingers shaping it into a jar, smooth as if it were a thought forming in air. He pauses to sprinkle sand on the surface, muttering that the river clay has too much silt this season. He sighs, as if this is the greatest tragedy in Egypt, which, considering crocodiles are out there, seems a little dramatic. But artisans have always been perfectionists, and you nod politely. The smell shifts against wheat and sharpaz. An incense seller passes by. His tray carries cones of perfumed resin, each one meant to melt slowly in the sun, releasing fragrance as an offering. You inhale deeply, catching frankincense, maybe myrrh, and something smoky you can't place. The seller swears it wards off evil spirits, mosquitoes, and even annoying relatives. You doubt the last one, but you'd buy a dozen if it worked. From the temple steps, a priest approaches, carrying a curious instrumentan, ancient water clock, a stone vessel marked with precise lines. He demonstrates how the dripping water inside measures the passing of hours, even at night when the sun can't help. You lean in, watching droplets fall like tiny crystal beads, ticking away time in silence. Historians call these clepsydras, and they debate whether they were truly accurate or just ceremonial props. You smile at the thought time itself, flowing through a leaky pot. Farther along the riverbank, a scribe sits cross-legged, his reed pen scratching across papyrus. His tongue pokes out as he concentrates, recording a list of offerings: bread, beer, figs, fowl. The script flows like tiny pictures, dancing, familiar yet alien. He pauses to shake sand over the ink, drying it before rolling the sheet carefully. He sighs, stretching his back, muttering about ink stains on his best kilt. Even the keepers of eternity worry about laundry. A flock of ibises takes off suddenly, their wings slicing the air with a rush of sound. They arc across the river, their shadows rippling across the boats below. For a moment, everything stills. The fishermen look up, the priests pause, the scribe freezes mid-stroke. It's as though the whole community holds its breath. Then life resumes. Laughter returns, oars splash, and you feel the hum of a city reawakening. By midday, the sun climbs high, glaring down with relentless brightness. You retreat to a shaded colonnade, stone cool beneath your hand, hieroglyphs etched deep in its surface. Some figures are crisp, others worn smooth, their meaning half swallowed by time. A guide a boy not much older than 12 points at a carving of a falcon-headed god. He declares it's Horus, though he squints and admits it might be Ra. You grin. Even the ancients struggled with too many gods wearing similar hats. The Nile glimmers beside you, steady and eternal, carrying papyrus rafts, carved boats, and drifting petals downstream. You imagine the same view centuries before and centuries after, a river threading history together with its ceaseless, liquid line. And as the incense lingers, the chants echo, and the water clock drips, you realize Egypt measured time not only in days or floods, but in rhythm stars, rising, reeds rustling, ibis wings flashing white against dawn. The island breeze greets you, first warm, slightly damp, with a tang of olives carried from terraced groves that climb the hillside. You've left the Nile behind and now step into the heart of Minoan Crete, where feasts stretch not for hours but for days, and where color clings to every wall, vessel and garment, as if the island itself refuses dullness. The palace of Knossos sprawls before you, its maze-like passages twisting with painted corridors, storerooms stacked with jars, and courtyards echoing with the scrape of sandals and the splash of wine in cups. You probably wouldn't last long in this labyrinth without getting lost or, at least accidentally, stumbling into the royal pantry and helping yourself to figs. Tonight, the palace hums with preparations for a banquet. Servants bustle with baskets of olives, pitchers of wine, and platters of fish grilled over smoky wood. The air is thick with the mingling of garlic, herbs, and roasted meat, undercut by the sweet sharpness of honey drizzled across cheese. You follow the scent into the great hall, where frescoes stretch across walls, bulls leaping mid-air, dolphins swimming through painted seas, lilies bending in stylized grace. The colors are still vibrant despite centuries, defying time with a stubborn brightness. Historians still argue whether the Minoans painted such scenes to honor gods, decorate for pleasure, or mask political messages. Looking at them now, you suspect all three humans rarely resist multitasking. At the long table, nobles recline on low couches, sipping from delicate Rhyton's conical vessels carved from stone or cast in metal. One is shaped like a bull's head, its eyes inlaid with gleaming shell, wine spilling from its mouth like a trickle of life. A man offers you a sip. It's strong, sweet, and spiced, and it burns just enough to make you wonder how many cups it takes before guests start inventing myths. A woman across from you plucks an olive from a dish, biting into it with a satisfied grin. She explains how the oil from these groves fuels lamps, softens skin, and sometimes settles disputes since no warlord wants to damage a good harvest. She leans in conspiratorially, whispering that last season someone tried mixing olive oil with powdered herbs to create a love potion. The results were disastrous, apparently causing more stomach aches than romance. You laugh, though carefully olive oil can be used for nearly anything, but maybe not matchmaking. In a corner of the hall, musicians play on double pipes, their notes weaving through the chatter like restless birds. The rhythm quickens, and dancers leap into the open space, their movements echoing the bull-leaping fresco. They twist, somersault, and land lightly, as if gravity is merely a suggestion. The crowd claps in time, and you feel the pulse in your own chest, half mesmerized, half wondering if you'd break your neck on the first attempt. As platters circulate, you notice one dish stands out, a mound of strange spices sprinkled over roasted lamb. The cook boasts that the seasoning arrived on a ship from lands beyond the horizon, traded for bronze and ceramics. He swears it carries the blessing of foreign gods. Some guests nod in reverence. Others roll their eyes, chewing without concern. You take a bite. Historians still debate how far Minoan trade networks reached, whether spices from Asia Minor, or even beyond, made their way to this island. Standing here, with the flavor clinging to your tongue, you suspect the truth traveled farther than expected. Between courses, conversation shifts to the frescoes, those mysterious symbols painted high in corridors. One noble insists they're sacred messages, a kind of proto-writing meant only for priests. Another claims they're nothing more than decoration, like the patterned wallpaper of their age. You trace a spiral motif with your finger, its curve hypnotic, its meaning elusive. Maybe both are right, or maybe the meaning was never meant to outlast the feast. A servant offers you a small clay cup filled with sweet, liquid fermented honey watered down with herbs. You sip and feel it warm your throat, softer than wine, almost like a dessert in liquid form. The servant tells you it's for easing the stomach after too much meat. You suspect it's more for keeping people upright long enough to make it home. The night deepens, and the feast grows louder. Jokes fly across the table, one about a fisherman who swore a dolphin rescued him, another about a priest who confused a jar of oil with a jar of fish brine. Laughter bursts like waves, echoing off the painted walls. You notice how the humor weaves through everything, the food, the art, even the rituals. Life here doesn't seem solemn. It feels playful, exuberant, almost defiantly joyful. As the feast winds down, guests wander into the courtyard. Torches flicker, throwing long shadows against the palace walls. Someone strums a lyre softly, the notes drifting into the night air. Above, the stars shine clear, mirrored faintly in the wine spilled on the stones. You close your eyes, still tasting honey and spice, still hearing the clatter of dancers' feet. In the labyrinth of corridors, frescoes wait in silence, their dolphins frozen mid-lep, their bulls caught mid-air. The palace will one day fall, its walls crumbling, its meaning debated by strangers. But tonight, it thrums with life, olive oil shimmering in lamps. Voices rising in laughter, dancers twisting through the torchlight. You walk away with the faint smell of herbs clinging to your clothes, the taste of wine lingering, and the sense that joy, painted and sung, resists the silence of time. You used to think paradise would be greener. When you first heard the name Campania, the breadbasket of Rome, the jewel of Italy, a land kissed by God, Sue pictured endless orchards, wide fields, and air thick with the scent of figs and grapes. What you didn't picture was your own body bent double, your tunic soaked through, and a dull shovel in your hand that feels heavier with every strike against the soil. The order came at dawn, as orders always do. You and the others had barely rubbed the sleep out of your eyes before the centurion's voice cracked across the tents, ditches, both sides of the road, 3 feet deep, 2 feet wide. Now, he didn't explain why, because he never explains why. You don't get reasons, you get work. And this morning, work means digging trenches in land that everyone back in Rome insists is paradise. The ground here is deceptive. From a distance, it looks soft, fertile, welcoming. Up close, it's a patchwork of stubborn roots, rocks that laugh at iron, and clay that clings like wet leather. Every thrust of the shovel into earth comes with resistance. You learn quickly not to waste energy fighting it. Instead, you pry, you twist, you wiggle the blade like you're coaxing secrets from the soil. When you finally tear free a clump, you're rewarded with only a foot of progress. 3 feet deep feels like an abyss. The sun rises, and with it comes the true weight of the task. Paradise bakes you alive. Sweat floods your eyes, so salty it stings, and your tunic grows heavy, as if waterlogged from within. You can't take it off, though the sun doesn't just scorch, it peels skin from bone. You've seen recruits try to work bare-chested, and by nightfall they are blistered messes, useless for days, sometimes weeks. The centurion doesn't pity them. He marks them as weak and moves on. You're learning the cruel balance. Protect your body from the sun, but suffocate under the fabric. Around you, the line of men is a chorus of grunts and curses. Every so often, a shovel strikes a stone, sending a shiver up the wooden shaft and into bone. Someone cries out, a fingernail ripped off, a blister burst open. Blood drops into the dirt and disappears like it was meant to be there. No one pauses, no one helps. You've all been warned enough times. The ditch doesn't care about your pain, and neither does the officer watching from the shade. That shade haunts you. A little copse of olive trees sits just up the slope where the centurion leans against a trunk with his arms folded. He has water, of course. He drinks slowly, deliberately, so that you notice. You wonder if he's savoring the torture of letting you see relief without tasting it yourself. Some days you think he does it to harden you. Other days you think he does it because he can. Rome runs on discipline, but Rome also runs on cruelty dressed as order. Your hands blister. They always blister. No matter how much callus builds, the earth finds new ways to cut you open. Dirt grinds into the raw spots, blackening them. You could wash the wounds at night if you were given enough water. But water is rationed, and drinking comes first. The sores fester. They always fester. And yet, you grip the shovel tighter. You can't afford to show weakness. Weakness gets you reassigned to punishment, duty or, worse, singled out for mockery. The army doesn't kill you with swords. It kills you with humiliation and exhaustion until you wish a sword would hurry up and finish the job. And all the while, as you dig, you ask yourself the question no one dares speak aloud. Why? Why dig here? Why now? You are not building walls to defend against barbarians. You are not preparing fortifications in hostile lands. This is Campania, Rome's jewel. The locals smile at the soldiers in the market. They sell figs, olives, bread. Their children run laughing beside the road. There is no war here, not yet. So why carve ditches into Eden? The whispered answer is discipline. Rome is paranoid. Rome believes paradise makes men soft, and softness is a disease more dangerous than any enemy. The ditch is not for defense. The ditch is for you. A soldier idle in paradise is a soldier corrupted. Give him wine, women, rest, and within weeks he forgets how to hold a sword. So the generals invented a cure: endless, mindless labor. Where there is no battle, you build. Where there are no enemies, you carve trenches into the soil until your body breaks. Rome wages war not just on others, but on your own comfort. By midday, The world shimmers. Heat rises from the earth like invisible smoke. Every breath scorches your lungs. You suck in air, but it feels empty, as though you're inhaling fire instead of oxygen. Men stumble to collapse outright, their bodies twitching. The centurion doesn't rush to help. He waits. If they rise again, they'll live. If they don't, someone else will dig in their place. You realize, with a kind of cruel calm, that this is also the point. A ditch weeds out the weak. Somewhere behind you, someone starts singing. It's not cheerful, it's a mutter of rhythm, just enough to keep the shovels striking in time. Others pick it up, voices cracked, tuneless. You join in, because singing is easier than silence. Silence leaves you alone with the weight of the sun and the endless question of how many feet you've dug, how many more to go. The song doesn't mean anything. It's just sound, a distraction, a reminder that you're not buried yet. At dusk, when the sky finally bleeds purple, the centurion raises his hand. You stop. You don't collapse, not yet. That's a luxury you can't afford until he dismisses you. You lean on the shovel, shoulders quaking, legs trembling like reeds in wind. You look back at the trench. It stretches like a scar across the land, raw and ugly. You half expect the earth itself to groan, to ask why you have wounded it. But the land stays silent, as it always does. The order to return to camp comes at last. You shoulder your shovel, though it feels heavier than a shield, heavier than any weapon you've carried. You stumble back with the others. No one talks. Talking takes air, and you've none to spare. When night falls, paradise grows quiet again. The olive trees rustle, the air cools, and the sky fills with stars so bright you almost forgive the day. You lie on the ground, aching, staring upward. For a moment, it feels like the poets weren't lying about Campania after all. Maybe this is paradise. Maybe the trick is that paradise was never meant for you. You close your eyes, and before sleep drags you under, one thought repeats. Tomorrow, there will be more ditches. There are always more ditches. Paradise is infinite work, disguised as beauty. You walk out into the dust, not the golden dust of legends, the kind painted in tapestries that hung in European courts centuries later, but the real thing, powdery grit that clings to your lashes, settles in the folds of your robe, and grinds between your teeth until every swallow tastes like earth. The Silk Road, they call it, though no single road could contain its reach. To you, it is a shifting horizon, an endless march across sands, steppe, and stone, where ghosts travel beside the living. At dawn, you hear them, not voices exactly, but the groaning creak of old caravan wheels, long abandoned, the distant bell of camels, whose bones have already whitened under the desert sun. Traders swear the sound is only wind, but when you wake in the night to the hollow cry of something moving beyond the torchlight, your skin prickles with a certainty that others have walked here before you and not all of them left. The merchants you travel with carry silk, spices, and jade. Their faces are as worn as the leather straps binding their cargo, and their eyes scan the horizon more often than they rest on the goods. Profit is one thing, survival another. Each man knows the price of being too far behind when a sandstorm rises, or when horsemen crest the ridge with arrows notched. To fall on the Silk Road is to vanish. One storm, one raid, one illness, and your name evaporates like water poured on hot stone. And yet this road is not empty of life. Villages appear like mirages, sometimes no more than mud walls around a single well. In their shadows, children's laughter mingles with the bray of donkeys. Women sell dried fruits and boiled millet to weary travelers, their hands cracked but steady. Even here, where existence is nothing but negotiation with scarcity, people find ways to plant roots. Still, you notice the way they stare at you at every stranger who passes. A traveler brings coin, yes, but also trouble, disease, spies, armies disguised as merchants. Their suspicion is as much a part of the road as the dust. At night, the caravan circles its wagons. Fires flare low, and stories rise higher. Men speak of Samarkand with its blue domes gleaming like pieces of the sky scattered on earth. Others dream aloud of Chang'an, where emperors collect tributes from every corner of the world. You hear names like Kashgar, Bukhara, Antioch, whispered with reverence. These cities are more than places. They are promises. Promises of wealth, of survival, of belonging somewhere at the end of this endless line of sand. But the ghosts never leave. You sense them most in the stillness before dawn. The desert holds echoes, hoofbeats pounding through centuries, the clink of coins changing hands, the last cry of a merchant gutted for a pouch of silk. The road remembers everything. The graves are shallow here. The wind is stronger than memory, yet somehow both remain. You imagine bones beneath your feet like unmarked milestones, each step pressing down on someone else's ending. There is one night you will not forget. The caravan halts near a ruined watchtower. Its stones are half swallowed by sand, its windows blind sockets staring into nothing. Local guides refuse to sleep inside, muttering about restless traders. You laugh with the others at their superstition, but later, when you walk past the tower's shadow, you feel the coldness of air that has no source. You pause, straining to hear. The silence deepens until it is almost a roar. Then, faintly, you catch the murmur of languages you do not know, snatches of bargaining, anger, laughter. You turn, but the camp behind you is silent. When you look back at the tower, its dark doorway seems wider, as if it is inviting you to step inside. You do not. Travel is measured not in miles, but in burdens. Your back aches from the jolting sway of camels. Your skin cracks under sun and wind, and yet the greater weight is invisible. Every deal struck, every bribe paid at a border, every promise made under threat of steel adds another stone to the load you carry. You begin to wonder if this road was ever about silk at all. Silk is fragile, a whisper of fabric that can tear on a careless nail. The road, by contrast, is eternal. It consumes men and leaves their wealth meaningless. Sometimes you wonder why anyone still walks it, but then you reach an oasis. The water is cold and sweet. The date palms whisper in the breeze, and merchants from distant kingdoms sit side by side, trading in dozens of tongues. You see a Greek haggling with an Indian over indigo dye, while a Persian praises the shimmer of Chinese brocade. In such moments, you feel the heartbeat of something vast, a world stitched together, not by empire or conquest, but by trade, fragile and fleeting though it may be. Here, enemies share shade. Here, knowledge travels farther than any army. Perhaps the ghosts are not only warnings, but reminders that every step adds a thread to this sprawling tapestry of human ambition. And yet, danger returns with the horizon. You hear of entire caravans swallowed by storms, of rulers demanding tribute so steep that merchants abandon their goods and flee in despair. Of bandits who leave no survivors, only ashes of what once was wealth. You realize that survival itself is a kind of profit. To walk off this road alive is a fortune. Still, you walk. You have no choice. The Silk Road is not only geography, it is destiny. Once you set foot upon it, it claims you. The ghosts are proof of that. They are not strangers, after all. They are you, or they will be, sooner than you think. Every weary step, every whispered prayer to reach the next safe well, every coin passed from your hand to another sit, is all a transaction with the road itself. By the time you glimpse the walls of the next city, your heart leaps and falters in the same breath. Relief floods you, but so does dread. Each gate leads not to safety, but to another bargain, another risk, another chance for your story to become just another echo in the dust. The road stretches on, always farther, always demanding. And as you walk beneath the city's archway, you realize you are not just a traveler. You are already one of its ghosts. You stand before the doorway, though no door remains. The air is hot with a faint bitterness, as if centuries of smoke still linger here, caught between stones that should long have cooled. You hesitate, because every step you take forward is also a step into absence, into the hollow where words once lived. The library is no library anymore. It is a mausoleum, and its dead are pages no one can read. You try to imagine the shelves that once lined these walls, cedar, maybe, or oak, polished smooth by hands long gone. They would have been heavy with scrolls wrapped in linen, texts stacked by subject, each roll carrying the voice of someone who believed, desperately, that their words might outlast their body. Philosophy, medicine, astronomy, plays, laws, lies, confessions, fragments of hymns. All of it gathered here, all of it consumed in fire. The thought sickens you because you know what flames do to paper. They start with a single corner, flicking up in mockery, then curl inward, blackening, collapsing, until the words crumble to dust, too fine to salvage. Multiply that by thousands upon thousands, and you are left with silence. Not the silence of peace, but of theft, the sound of humanity's memory being erased. You step deeper. The ash clings to your shoes, fine as flour, and you realize with a slow horror that you are walking across the remains of minds. Every footprint is a desecration. Every breath you take pulls in some remnant of a lost sentence, a lost thought. You wonder whether those thoughts are still alive in some way, carried invisibly into new bodies, into your body. The fire weather, sparked by accident, war, or neglect, was mercilessly thorough. Entire generations of knowledge disappeared in nights no one can fully recount. You imagine the scholars who might have watched, powerless as their life's work became nothing but sparks carried away by the wind. Their cries must have been animal in their grief, guttural and raw, because they knew that what burned was not just parchment, but possibility. Medicines never discovered, maps never charted, questions never answered. The future itself shriveled away with the pages. You run your hand along a cracked wall and feel the rough scar of heat baked into stone. It's a scar shared by humanity, though most people today never touch it, never even think about it. But you cannot help thinking about it now. You cannot help mourning, and as you do, you also cannot help noticing how many modern fires still burn not literal flames licking through shelves, but quieter, slower ones. Languages disappearing by the week. Oral traditions silenced. when the last elder dies, stories lost when no one bothers to write them down. We are still burning, you realize. We are still losing. What humbles you most is this: you, Dan T., even know what you, Dan T., know. The loss is not just the texts we had did s, the texts we never even be aware existed. How many plays rivaled Sophocles, but vanished? How many cures were described centuries before modern medicine stumbled upon them? How many ways of seeing the world, ways that might have healed or changed us, are gone forever? That is the cruelest wound of the Library of Ashes. The absences it leaves are unnameable. You pause in the center of the ruin and close your eyes. For a moment, you let the silence speak. Maybe there's an echo of voices still here, too faint to measure, but present in the particles. Maybe memory clings in ways you can't see. And maybe, in listening, you're keeping a fragment alive, not in ink, not in parchment, but in yourself. It strikes you then that libraries, however vast, were never just about storage. They were about trust. Every scroll placed on a shelf was an act of faith that the future would care enough to protect it. That faith was betrayed here, burned into dust. But as you stand among the ashes, you realize that faith can be renewed each time someone remembers. Each time someone tells a story. Each time someone protects a fragile page. Each time someone copies an idea into another form. You crouch, scoop a pinch of ash between your fingers, and let it fall back to the ground. It slips away, irretrievable, just like the knowledge it once carried. But the gesture feels necessary. It feels like acknowledgement, a ritual of mourning. You bow your head as though before a grave, and the words come to you unbidden. We are sorry. We remember. We will try again. The Library of Ashes does not answer. It has no voice left to give. And yet you feel, deep in your chest, a weight lift ever so slightly. Because in acknowledging what was lost, you are also testifying to what still matters: the fragile miracle of memory, the stubborn persistence of story, the fire that destroys, but also the fire that warms and illuminates. You will carry this silence with you, and you will not let it burn again, not if you can help it. And so you step out, leaving the ruin behind. But some part of you will always remain here, standing among the ashes, listening for voices that once were, and promising to guard the ones that remain. You hold a cup in your hand. It's smooth, curved, perfect enough that it feels inevitable, as if it always existed. But it didn't. Someone, somewhere, someone took wet clay, shaped it with aching fingers, risked the fire, and discovered pottery. You'll never know their name, neither will anyone else. Yet every sip you take from a vessel today echoes their fumbling, desperate brilliance. That's the curse of invention. The world remembers the tool, not the hand that made it. Walk through the ruins of history, and you'll stumble over ghosts who were never given the dignity of being recorded. The wheel turns, and you imagine Sumerian fields. A plow cuts soil, and you imagine endless harvests. But who carved the first axle? Who tested which wood wouldn't crack under pressure? Who thought to bind animals to burden? The names dissolve like sand. Civilization marches forward on forgotten backs. The story repeats with every discovery. Fire hardened into steel. Ink brushed onto parchment. Glass bent light into vision. Anonymous thinkers died with soot in their lungs, with burns on their arms, with ridicule in their ears. And still the world took their creations, scrubbed away their existence, and crowned kings and conquerors with the credit. You've been taught to admire Archimedes, Leonardo, Edison, but they stand atop mountains of corpses, of craftsmen who solved problems with no applause, of thinkers whose inventions were stolen, patented, or suppressed. Do you know who built the water wheels that fed Rome, or who created the first algorithm in a Baghdad marketplace to calculate taxes? The answers are silence. Imagine a weaver in ancient China, her loom clacking in rhythm with her heartbeat. She experiments with threads from cocoons, boiling them, teasing strands so thin they shine in the sunlight. Silk is born, not in a royal court, but in the aching hands of a woman whose name will never grace the annals. Generations of emperors will cloak themselves in her discovery, calling it divine, while she remains buried in dirt, forgotten even by her own descendants. Or picture a nameless artisan in Alexandria, experimenting with sand, ash, and fire, stumbling upon the first pane of clear glass. He may have cursed the fragility, the way it cracked with every mistake. He could not have known that centuries later, glass would refract the cosmos into telescopes, would pierce cells into microscopes, would unlock galaxies and bacteria alike. His failure was the foundation of knowledge, and yet his name erased with the smoke that left the chimney. Inventions were often punished as much as they were celebrated. Think of Heron of Alexandria, who designed steam engines in miniature. The empire dismissed him because his machines were toys. But what about the unnamed apprentices who helped him? They cut the metal, sealed the pipes, inhaled fumes, tested flame against brass. They carried the burden of work, but the history books lock their faces in shadow. You live in a world thick with tools, paper, compass, gunpowder, printing press, antibiotics, electricity. For every invention you can trace to a celebrated name, there are 1,000 others swallowed by obscurity. Do you think Gutenberg pressed the letters himself? Every page, every line, without the quiet endurance of countless printers, apprentices, engravers. Do you think Edison truly conjured the light bulb alone, without dozens of workers who tried, failed, and burned their fingers on filaments until one finally endured? The truth is uncomfortable. Civilization is a collective grave of creativity. Every bridge, every road, every instrument rests upon bones. The forgotten inventors do not haunt in malice. They haunt in silence. They live in the stubborn fact that you cannot name them, even though you owe them every convenience you take for granted. Pause for a moment. Look at the chair beneath you, the screen before your eyes, the shoes on your feet. Ask yourself, who made this possible? Not the factory, not the brand, not the corporate logos, but the mind that first cracked the code of leather tanning. The hands that stitched fibers into a pattern strong enough to bear weight. The anonymous genius who realized sand could carry information when etched with circuits. Each is a phantom in your life. The tragedy of forgetting inventors is not merely loss of credit, it is loss of story. Without story, invention seems like magic, dropped from the sky by a few chosen men. But invention is not magic, it is suffering, persistence, error, accident, and stubborn refusal to accept the world as it is. Without the forgotten inventors, you misunderstand what human progress truly costs. There is beauty in this anonymity, too. A potter 10,000 years ago did not demand a patent. A farmer who grafted the first fruit trees did not expect royalties. They invented because necessity gnawed at them, because hunger or survival pushed them forward. In their facelessness lies a strange purity. Invention as gift, not legacy. But you standing in the long aftermath must reckon with the silence. Do you honor only the names etched in marble, or do you sense the millions whose sweat hardened into civilization? To remember them is impossible. To forget them entirely is unforgivable. So perhaps the act of reverence is simpler, to see your world as layered with invisible fingerprints, each tool heavy with unseen lives. And the next time you hold something ordinary, a spoon, a glass, a page, whisper to the silence, someone made this possible. You may never know who, but you can at least refuse to pretend it came from nowhere. That whisper, however small, is resistance against erasure. Because the greatest inventors were not those whose names history preserved. They were the ones who, without ever being known, quietly reshaped what it means to be human. And though they are forgotten, you live inside their legacy every second of your life. You smell the feast before you see it. Rich scents of roasted meat, honey-glazed fowl, and spiced wine roll down the marble corridors like waves. The air is thick with fat, with perfume, with the overbearing sweetness of ripened fruit sweating in bowls of silver. When you step into the hall, the sight nearly blinds you. Chandeliers dripping with wax-light, tables stretched until they seem endless. Their surfaces groaning with pyramids of bread, roasted oxen split in half, platters of fish glittering under sauce, and mounds of sugared almonds piled like small mountains. The nobles arrive dressed in gold-threaded tunics, silks that ripple like water. They glide in with laughter like knives, their voices sharp with indulgence. Rings sparkle on their fingers, jewels drip from their necks, and each face shines with powder and oils imported from lands half the empire away. They settle into their chairs, carved thrones for temporary kings of the evening, while slaves and servants scurry barefoot, filling goblets, carving meat, balancing steaming trays of delicacies from every corner of the known world. You sit low in the shadows, unseen. Perhaps you are a servant yourself, or worse, a hungry witness, forced to watch and smell and never taste. You look closer at the platters, whole birds stuffed with smaller birds, which are in turn stuffed with eggs and herbs, until the dish is more spectacle than sustenance. Pastries shaped like animals leap from gilded trays, dough twisted into mockery of life. A cake rises from the center of the table, so large it could house a child inside, and indeed, once cut, it reveals sparrows that flutter out in confusion, their wings dusted with flour. The crowd erupts in applause. It is all theater. Food has become more than food. It is a statement, a weapon, a tool of power. Here, eating is not about survival, but domination. To eat like this is to announce to the world, I can consume what others cannot. I can waste what others beg for. You know what lies beyond these palace walls. The smell of rot, the cries of the hungry, the thin bodies of peasants bending in fields, children pressing mud to their lips to silence the hunger gnawing in their bellies, mothers rocking infants who will not wake. Their bread is a dream. Here, bread is thrown to dogs because only peacocks glazed in saffron will do. And yet the nobles eat with no shame. They boast of their hunts, of the rare spices carried by caravans across deserts, of the fish that had to be hauled alive from far-off seas so that their tongues might taste freshness. They chew with open mouths, their laughter spraying crumbs onto the shoulders of their neighbors, who do not mind, for indulgence forgives all ugliness. A servant staggers, spilling a little wine. A goblet clatters to the ground. Instantly, a noble's hand lashes out, a ring cutting across the servant's cheek. Blood joins the wine on the floor, yet the music does not stop. The lyres continue, the flutes sing, the dancers whirl, and the feast swallows the sound of suffering. You begin to notice the bones. At first, they are neatly stacked at the edges of plates, reminders of the living creatures devoured tonight. But then you see more bones, tossed carelessly under the table. Bones piled into corners where dogs gnaw, bones cracked by teeth, too greedy to wait for knives. The feast becomes a charnel house, the air thick with marrow, with grease, with the ghosts of the animals sacrificed for amusement. And you think, this is not a banquet of the living, but a banquet of bones. Every feast has its shadow. In ancient Egypt, while pharaohs dined in golden halls, slaves worked themselves into death to build monuments that would outlast the flesh that chewed those delicacies. In Rome, senators reclined on couches while gladiators bled for sport, the taste of olives still on the tongues of spectators as they cheered death. In medieval castles, kings demanded peacocks roasted whole, their feathers reattached for spectacle, while peasants outside fought over crusts of bread that fell from carts. The pattern never ends. History itself feasts in this way. It consumes people, devours their labor, and spits out bones for future generations to pick clean. You imagine yourself at the table, not as a noble, but as a witness to the absurdity. You reach for a goblet of wine, heavy with spices, and so sweet it burns. But when you lift it, the surface darkens. It is not wine, but blood, the blood of those who harvested the grapes, those who carried the amphorae across seas, those beaten into silence to make possible this single sip. You set the goblet down, but no one else notices. They keep drinking, laughing, devouring. The dancers move through the hall, bodies gleaming with oil, their steps trained for years so that these moments of delight can be purchased for coin. One falters slightly, her ankle twisting, but she keeps smiling, because to stop would mean punishment. You wonder how many bodies have been broken just to keep these nights of pleasure intact. Then the music rises, and the feast shifts. Now they demand entertainment beyond food. A man brings out a roasted calf, its mouth stuffed with apples, but instead of carving it, he tells a story, weaving myth into meat, until the audience laughs, not at the humor, but at their own cleverness for recognizing the tale. The calf is butchered mid-sentence, its skin tearing as knives dig in, applause drowning the story. You think again of the poor outside. They will never see this food, never taste these flavors. Their banquet is hunger, their table empty, their feast nothing but gnawing pain. Their bones, too, will join this silent pile. The bones, not of animals, but of humans, sacrificed to keep the rich fed, and still you remain. You cannot leave. You are part of this history, bound to its cruelty. To walk away would not erase the truth. Humanity has always feasted like this, on the backs of others. But then a silence falls over the hall. A noble chokes on a bone too carelessly swallowed. At first the others laugh, thinking it a joke, but soon his face turns purple, his hands clawing at his throat. Panic ripples. A physician is summoned, knives and hooks pulled from bags, but nothing works. The noble collapses onto the table, his face smashing into the sugared almonds. The music stops, and in that moment, the illusion cracks. You see them for what they are, fragile bodies, fragile lives, no different from the peasants outside. Their bones will join the same earth, no matter how much they feast tonight. The hall empties slowly, unease settling over the survivors. Servants clear the tables, sweeping away food not even touched. The dogs outside grow fat on scraps that could have fed villages, and the cycle continues. Tomorrow there will be another banquet, another display, another night of bones. You leave the hall at last. The night air is cool, free of grease, free of perfume, but the smell clings to you, the memory of excess etched into your lungs. You know you have witnessed not a celebration but a truth. Civilization itself is a banquet of bones, and we are all seated at the table, whether we eat or not. You imagine yourself not in the glare of daylight, but inside a stone throat that swallows sound. The prison walls are slick with centuries of damp breathing cold into your bones. Chains jangle faintly in the darkness, a metallic punctuation to the silence, until another sound rises, a voice, low, ragged, but steady. Then another. Soon, a trembling harmony threads itself into the night. The prisoner's choir is born not of freedom, but of absence, not of hope, but of necessity. It begins because words are too dangerous to share, too easily twisted by guards into evidence of rebellion. But melody, unmoored from grammar, slips through cracks in stone. You hear them humming, whispering, half-remembered hymns, lullabies from childhood, fragments of folk songs they once sang in fields. The music is fragile, yet somehow it does not break. In these cells, where names are forgotten, the song is the only proof of existence. A Roman slave condemned for theft hums beside a Jewish captive awaiting execution. Centuries later, a man shackled for debt in London's Newgate prison mutters a psalm. In Siberia, a line of political exiles carves the rhythm of folk ballads into frozen air. Their languages differ, their chains vary, but their voices braid together across time. You see them in your mind's eye, hunched bodies rocking in rhythm, lips cracked from thirst, but still shaping sound. To sing here is defiance. Each note insists, I am still human. The guards hate it. They bark for silence, slam batons against iron doors. Sometimes they drag the loudest singers away, returning them broken or not at all. Yet the songs return, softer perhaps, hidden in coughs, disguised in whistles. Music, after all, does not need permission. Think of the paradox. The prison is designed to erase individuality, to compress men and women into silence. Yet silence itself becomes unbearable, a cavern too wide to cross alone. And so they sing, binding themselves together through invisible cords. Consider the dungeons beneath medieval castles, where monks imprisoned for heresy whispered chants through the cracks of their cells, their Latin phrases ricocheting down corridors like ghostly prayers, or the Ottoman galleys, where chained oarsmen groaned in rhythm, their voices blending with the creak of wood and the slap of water, transforming drudgery into a bleak kind of choir. Even in Nazi camps, where death brushed daily against bare skin, survivors tell of voices lifting, almost against reason, into songs of home, faith, or grief. You wonder what it would sound like if all these threads of music were woven together, a single global requiem for the imprisoned, echoing across centuries, not polished, not sweet, but raw, filled with brokenness and stubborn life. And yet history forgets them. Official chronicles speak of kings, treaties, battles, and inventions, but seldom of the men and women who drowned silence with song behind bars. Their music dissolves into stone, leaving only rumor, faint testimony, scraps of notation scribbled by a visitor. A single friar mentions in a diary that he heard heretics singing as they marched to the stake. A sailor recalls the chants of galley slaves pulling him across the Mediterranean. An ex-prisoner whispers decades later of a hymn that kept him alive through hunger. These are fragments, ghosts of sound. Why does it matter to remember? Because these voices remind you that beauty and dignity are not privileges reserved for the free. They are instincts, primal as breath. To make sound is to resist erasure. Even the condemned understood this. Their bodies might be broken, but as long as they had a throat and a will, they could still echo. There is also the haunting irony. Songs that were born in chains often survive long after their singers are gone. Consider the spirituals of enslaved Africans in the Americas, rising from plantations and prison farms alike. Those melodies, first hummed under the watch of whips, now fill grand concert halls. But few who listen realize they are hearing the survival songs of prisoners. The chain rattles have been smoothed into rhythm, the cries polished into choirs. Yet, at their core, remains the same stubborn truth. They sang because silence meant death. You close your eyes and try to hear it, not as art, but as necessity. A single voice cracking under hunger, then a second answering in solidarity. The melody is not pretty, it is jagged, uneven, carried by throats too dry, too sore. But soon it becomes something larger than any individual, a collective heartbeat in sound. This is what history erases when it writes only of rulers and wars. It forgets that while kings dined above, prisoners sang below. That for every banquet of bones, there was a dungeon of voices. That the human spirit, caged, still found a way to soar in sound, if only for a moment before the lash or the noose. And you, standing centuries away, cannot help but wonder what it says about humanity, that some of its purest music was born in darkness, that perhaps beauty is never more powerful than when it is fragile, trembling against the certainty of silence. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them still. Not the melodies themselves, which have long since dissolved, but the echo of defiance carried in every note. A choir of the forgotten singing, not for applause, not for legacy, but simply to remind themselves, and us, that they once lived, that they once had voices, and that even in the pit of despair, they refused to be silent. And as the last imagined chord fades, you are left with a strange ache, the knowledge that history has forgotten their names, but not entirely their sound. Somewhere in the stones of prisons, in the timbers of ships, in the soil of exile camps, those vibrations still sleep, waiting, perhaps, for an ear to remember. You hear them before you see them. The bell tolls first, deep, metallic, and merciless, cutting through the night air with a rhythm that offers no pause, no mercy. The sound carries across rooftops and along cobbled streets, waking those who pretend to sleep and reminding them that death does not rest. It tolls once, twice, then again, until the rhythm becomes a heartbeat, the pulse of the city itself, except this heartbeat is not the promise of life, but the announcement of loss. And then they come. The procession moves like a slow river, black and shrouded, winding through streets emptied of laughter, emptied of trade, emptied of everything except fear. Torches gutter in the damp night, smoke rising in curls that sting your nose. Hooded men walk at the front, swinging censers heavy with incense, meant to drive away the corruption of the air. The smell is sharp, spices and resin, mixed with something sour underneath, something the incense cannot mask. The sweetness clings to your throat until you cough, as though the smoke itself resists your body's attempt to keep it out. Behind them come the carts. Wooden wheels creak against stone, the axles groaning, as if they too suffer beneath the weight they carry. The carts are filled with bodies, stacked like kindling, wrapped hastily in linen if cloth was available, left bare if not. Feet dangle over the edges, stiff, swollen, fingers curl around nothing. A woman's braid hangs loose, trailing the stones as the cart moves forward. No one stops to fix it. No one dares. You want to look away, but your eyes betray you. They cling to the sight of the bodies as if to memorize them. Neighbors, strangers, maybe friends. You think you might recognize a hand or a curve of jaw, but the features blur. The human melts into something unrecognizable. The linen darkens where fluids seep through, staining cloth that was once white. The smell hits next, more powerful than the incense, more powerful than your will. It is the smell of the end of flesh, surrendering itself to rot. You cover your mouth, but it seeps through cloth and skin. It seeps into memory. The priests chant as they walk, their voices weaving above the creak of the carts. Latin syllables, heavy with authority, rise and fall in a drone, meant to order chaos, meant to push back against panic. The chant tells you the dead are being guided somewhere better. The chant tells you that what you see is not all that there is. But in the silence between phrases, when the air is only filled with creaking wheels and the sound of rats scuttling, you wonder if the priests believe their own words. You fall in step for a moment, drawn by the rhythm, by the hypnotic sway of torchlight on stone walls. The crowd that has gathered presses against doorways, unwilling to join, yet unable to look away. Children peek out from skirts, their faces wide-eyed, mouths covered. A man makes the sign of the cross so many times it becomes frantic, desperate, like a child repeating a charm against the dark. Another woman mutters prayers under her breath, her fingers worrying beads until they cut into her skin. And still the carts roll on. They say these processions are necessary. They say the dead must be removed quickly, or the plague will spread faster. They say the chanting soothes the living as much as it honors the dead. But you wonder if the processions themselves are what spreads fear faster than the pestilence. Every night you hear the bell. Every night you smell the incense and the stench. Every night you are forced to look at the truth. The city is dying, and you are still here, waiting your turn. A group of flagellants joins the procession now. Bare-chested, their skin already torn from earlier lashings, they strike themselves with whips, each blow punctuated by cries of penance. The sound of leather against flesh is rhythmic, sickening. Blood spatters the stones, mingling with the ashes of incense. They shout that this suffering is punishment for sins, that only pain can cleanse the corruption. You watch, transfixed, as their bodies twist with every strike. Some fall, yet rise again, as though dragged forward by something stronger than will. Their voices merge with the priests, a cacophony of despair and devotion. You wonder if God listens. The plague does not pause for processions. The carts keep filling, day after day, night after night. Sometimes the bell rings so often you lose track of hours. The city is mapped not by streets anymore, but by where the carts travel, where the bodies are taken. A square once filled with markets is now filled with graves. A church that once echoed with weddings now holds only funerals. You think about those not in the carts yet, those still behind locked doors, families who cough in silence, praying not to be heard, not to be taken too soon. You imagine them listening to the bell from inside, hearing it toll for someone else, while their own turn creeps closer. You picture them clutching hands in the dark, whispering final words before the knocking at the door comes, before the men in black cloaks drag their loved ones to join the procession. There are whispers too, whispers that not all who ride in the carts are dead, that some are only half-breathing, mistaken for corpses, or discarded as soon as they falter, that the linen binds are not always kind, that sometimes they hold people still while their hearts still try to beat. You try not to believe it, but when the carts pass and you see a limb twitch, you feel your stomach knot. Was it a trick of torchlight, a rat beneath the cloth, or was it something else, a breath to faint, a final plea unheard beneath the chants? The processions continue until dawn. At the city's edge, trenches gape open like wounds. The carts unload, bodies sliding into earth, without names, without farewells. Priests throw handfuls of soil, mutter words too fast to mean anything, and then the trench is filled. The ground is leveled, as if nothing ever happened. Tomorrow, another trench will open. Tomorrow, another procession will end the same way. You walk home with the sound of the bell still in your ears, still inside your chest. Even when silence returns, it is not silence anymore. It is an echo of tolls, a phantom rhythm that follows you into your dreams. You try to imagine the city before, with laughter in the streets, with bells that rang for weddings or feasts, but the memory feels fragile, already fading, replaced by the endless parade of carts and chants. And you realize this is what the plague has done. It has turned life itself into a procession. Every day is the march toward the trench. Every step is one closer to the end. You live not in houses, not in streets, but in the shadow of the bell, in the smoke of incense, in the stench of decay. You ask yourself if the processions are for the dead or for the living. Perhaps they are for both. Perhaps they are a reminder that no one escapes, that all will join eventually. Or perhaps they are the last fragile attempt to hold on to ritual when everything else collapses. You do not know. You only know that tomorrow, when the bell tolls again, you will hear it. You will smell the incense. You will see the carts. And you will wonder if, this time, they are coming for you. You step into the temple at dawn, and the first thing that strikes you is not the chanting but the smell. A copper tempse hangs heavy in the air, mingling with incense that can never quite cover it. Smoke curls upward, carrying with it prayers and the remnants of yesterday's offering. The stone floor beneath your sandals is worn smooth from generations of feet shuffling toward the altar, toward the inevitable. You don't want to look too closely at the dark stains seeping between the slabs. They tell you what happens here better than any priest ever could. The altar stands ahead, raised above the crowd, like a stage where humanity negotiates with the divine. You see the priests dressed in immaculate robes, their faces unreadable, their hands steady. They carry knives honed so sharp they gleam even in the dim torchlight. To the uninitiated, they might look like butchers. To those gathered, they are intermediaries, the only ones capable of keeping the gods from turning their wrath against the people. You try to imagine the gods without these rituals. Would the rains fall? Would the harvest grow? Or would famine and pestilence sweep through the land until nothing remained? The fear is real, and it pulses through the crowd as strong as the drumbeat echoing from the courtyard. People press forward, some clutching charms, others whispering the names of loved ones they hope will be spared. You feel it in your chest. This ceremony is not performance, it is survival. The victim is led forward. Sometimes it is a prisoner taken in war, sometimes a slave, sometimes a volunteer whose devotion surpasses fear. Today it is a young man, his wrists bound, his eyes fixed on the altar. He walks as if already resigned, though every step trembles under the weight of what awaits. The crowd hushes as he approaches, and suddenly the temple is so silent you can hear the rasp of his breath. The priests move with practiced precision. They lay him across the altar, his back pressed against cold stone. The chants begin again, rising like a wave, filling the chamber with sound. You feel your own throat tighten as the knife is raised. For an instant, it glints like a star, and then it plunges. The sound is muffled, almost anticlimactic, and yet it shatters something inside you. Blood pours, hot and dark, spilling over the edges, streaking the altar red. It runs into carved channels that guide it downward, as though the stone itself thirsts. The crowd erupts. Some cry out in terror, others in ecstasy, believing the gods are now appeased. Priests lift their arms skyward, crimson dripping from their fingers, and voices join in a frenzy of devotion. You stand frozen, caught between horror and awe. It is barbaric, you think, and yet part of you understands the logic. When the world is cruel and inexplicable, when storms destroy crops and disease takes children without warning, what else can humanity offer except the most precious thing it has? You notice how the priests handle the body with reverence, how the chants soften as they complete the ritual. The young man's face is calm now, no longer twisted in fear. Some in the crowd believe his spirit has become divine, that his sacrifice will protect the community. Parents hold their children tighter, whispering that they are safe now. Fear has transformed into reassurance, if only for a while. The ceremony continues. Offerings of grain and wine are poured alongside the blood, symbolic tokens to accompany the life just taken. Musicians strike their drums harder, their rhythms echoing through your chest like another heartbeat. Dancers swirl, their movements wild, as if possessed by unseen forces, but one that leaves you unsettled. You can shake the feeling that the gods demand too much, that human life should not be reduced to bargaining chips. And yet, as the ritual reaches its climax, you see something undeniable: unity. In that moment, every person in the temple believes they are bound together, protected by the sacrifice. The poor and the powerful stand shoulder to shoulder, their differences momentarily erased. The altar, dripping with blood, becomes a symbol of shared survival. Without it, the people would scatter, fractured by fear and hopelessness. With it, they leave believing the gods will bless them. You turn away, but the image remains etched in your mind. The glint of the knife, the crimson flow, the way despair was transmuted into faith. You wonder how many lives have been given over centuries, how many hearts cut open, how many families consoled by the thought that their suffering had meaning. Was it ever enough? Did the gods ever truly answer? Or was it humanity convincing itself that control was possible in a world that so often feels uncontrollable? Outside, the sun is rising, bathing the temple steps in golden light. People file out, their faces calmer, their burdens lighter. Children laugh, vendors resume their calls, and life continues as if nothing happened. You walk among them, carrying the weight of what you've seen. The world looks unchanged, yet you know it isn't. Every drop of blood shed inside that temple has soaked into the earth, shaping the course of history. And you realize something unsettling. Though centuries will pass, though rituals will change, the altar never truly disappears. Humanity will always find new versions of it, new stages, new sacrifices, new ways to bleed in the hope of securing peace. You sit at a long marble table, polished so perfectly that the reflection of the chandeliers trembles like fire upon water. Silver plates gleam beneath roasted fowl, bowls of honeyed figs, mountains of oysters, and boar glazed with wine and herbs. Perfume drifts from the air, poured as freely as the wine that stains the lips of the guests beside you. Yet, if you listen carefully, beyond the music of the lyres, beyond the hollow laughter of senators' wives and the boasts of generals, you can hear something else. From outside, muffled through thick villa walls, the cries of the hungry press you are feasting in a fortress, while the city outside burns with need. The air here is thick with excess. Gold leaf glimmers on the skin of roasted birds, sprinkled not for taste, but as proof that wealth can mock the ordinary laws of appetite. You pick up your knife and carve into a pheasant stuffed with spiced dormice, delicacies that will never pass the lips of the people who built these walls. The laughter swells when a drunken guest falls backward, spilling a goblet of Falernian wine onto the mosaic floor. A single cup worth more than a farmer earns in a year. Slaves rush forward to clean, their eyes cast downward as though the spilt drink were their sin. You eat, but the food tastes faintly of ash. Perhaps it is the knowledge that famine has been stalking the countryside. Perhaps it is the memory of bodies stacked by plague. Perhaps it is the gnawing sense that this banquet is not celebration but denial, a ritual of forgetting. The guests toast to life, while the gods quietly sharpen their scythes. The courses keep coming. Peacock with its feathers reattached to its roasted body, glittering like a phantom. Fish from distant seas, carried in salt and ice across hundreds of miles, so that a senator's tongue can be teased for a moment. Platters of exotic fruits, figs bursting with honey, grapes as large as thumbs, all while the soil outside yields only scarcity. To eat here is to make a statement. We will feast while others die. The power of Rome is not only in conquest or law, it is here in the ability to transform suffering into entertainment, to gild hunger with spectacle. You shift in your seat as the slaves parade in the next dish. A sow split open, her belly spilling sausages of her own meat. A grotesque theater that makes the nobles cheer. A poet at the end of the table recites verses praising Bacchus, comparing wine to the lifeblood of civilization. The crowd applauds, though half do not listen. Their eyes are glazed with drink, their fingers slick with grease. A senator's mistress dips her jeweled hands into a bowl of honeyed almonds, the gems catching the candlelight like drops of frozen blood. You notice something peculiar. Between courses, between the jokes and boasts, there are glances exchanged, quick, sharp, anxious. These are not the looks of people who believe themselves immortal. They are the looks of people trying to outlaw their fear. For outside, plague carts roll. Outside, war threatens. Outside, famine presses close. Here, in this villa, The banquet is not abundance, it is barricade. Every roasted bird, every cup of wine, every song of the lyre is an act of defiance against the certainty that death waits at the door. A senator at your side leans close, his breath heavy with garlic and wine. He whispers, "Better to die with a full stomach than live gnawing on roots." He laughs at his own joke, but there is a tremor in his hand as he lifts his cup. Across the table, another man grows loud, demanding more spice, more pepper, more imported luxuries. He does not speak of his villa in the countryside burned by raiders, or of his tenants who now wander hungry roads. Instead, he shouts for more music, louder, always louder. The musicians obey. The lyres clash with the flutes. The singers raise their voices. But even so, sometimes in the pause between notes, you hear it, the wail of a starving child, the cough of the sick, the shuffle of feet dragging a corpse to a pit. For a moment, the feast falters. Then someone calls for more wine, and the silence is drowned again. The banquet drags on. You lose count of the courses. Fat pools on the table, bones piled high, and still the slaves carry more. A dish of flamingo tongues, delicate and absurd. A plate of lampreys in sauce, writhing almost alive. A roasted hare, presented with wings of pastry, as though to mock the gods by turning earthbound creatures into angels. You eat until you cannot. Your stomach rebels, yet the culture of excess demands that you push further to prove you are not merely full, but powerful enough to waste. Vomitoria, discreet chambers, off the side of the hall, wait for those who need to purge and return, ready to consume again. To stop is weakness. To continue is to assert dominance over nature, over hunger, over death itself. But in your heart, you know the truth. This is not victory. This is fear painted gold. The banquet is a mask, the laughter a shield, the wine a drug to numb the ache of the inevitable. You are not eating life, you are eating against death. Toward the end, torches gutter. The slaves stagger with exhaustion, still bearing trays. The nobles recline deeper, their voices slurring. A general boasts of victories that will never be recorded, his mind already slipping into stupor. A woman sings softly, her voice breaking, a song of old Rome, of fields and hearths, a song that has no place in this cavern of indulgence. For a moment, silence falls again. The chandeliers flicker, and outside, a crow caws, sharp and final. You look around at the faces, grease-stained, wind-drunk, their eyes darting even in their haze. They know, as you know, that this feast cannot last. The dam will break, the plague will enter, the famine will spread, the raiders will storm. And when that moment comes, all the gold-dusted peacocks, all the jeweled goblets, all the rivers of Falernian wine will mean nothing. But tonight they eat, tonight they sing, tonight they pretend, and you eat with them. Because to refuse is to admit that the darkness outside is real, that hunger and plague are more powerful than silver and spice. So you raise your cup, you let the wine burn your throat, and you join the laughter of the damned. The banquet continues. The city outside starves, and Rome feasts itself into silence. You never trust marble. It is too smooth, too cold, too still. You tell yourself that stone cannot feel, cannot see, cannot bleed, but then you remember the stories. You remember how the city whispered when the statue of Apollo wept one spring, salt tears streaking his perfect face as if the god himself mourned. You remember the panic that gripped the forum when the statue of Juno cracked open along her belly like a wound, and the augurs said it was the earth itself that screamed. The Romans live in fear of omens, and you are no different. Even in your rational moments, you know the world is not stable, not fixed. You see patterns where there may be none, and still you shiver. When a raven caws at the wrong hour, when lightning forks too close to the capital, when the sacred chickens refuse to eat, but nothing unsettles you more than when the silent things move, when the unbreathing things seem alive. Statues are supposed to be permanent, eternal. They are anchors of memory, embodiments of gods and emperors. When they cry, bleed, or crumble, it feels like the universe itself has shifted, like the sky might tear open above you. You were there when the statue of Mars dripped crimson at the temple steps. The priests gathered quickly, bowls and cloths in hand, to prove or disprove the miracle. Some claimed it was rust, others painted blood, but that did not stop the people from trembling. A soldier beside you muttered, "We are cursed." A woman clutched her child, as though Mars himself had reached down to claim him. That night, the taverns boiled with rumor. Some said the gods had turned against the emperor. Others swore it meant Rome's enemies were already at the gates. A few even whispered that it was no god at all, but the dead rising beneath the ground, their voices leaking upward in red. You never drank that night. You only watched the crowd, watched their fear coil tighter with each retelling, and you realized how fragile order really was. Rome prided itself on law, on reason, on empire, but when stone began to cry, even senators dropped their measured tones. Even generals crossed themselves and looked for signs in the sky. Years later, you still recall the statue of Caesar that groaned in the dark. It was said the marble shifted on its base, that the bronze eyes flickered with an unnatural glint. The rumor spread faster than plague. Merchants refused to open their stalls, senators refused to convene, and common men stood in the streets waiting for lightning to strike. The empire was bound together by fear as much as by power, and omens were cracks in the wall. You knew it because you felt it yourself. The dread that something immense and unseen leaned close to listen. At night, you dream of statues. You walk through the forum, and their stone eyes follow you. Some weep, some smile, some move their mouths without sound. You cannot tell whether the dreams are warnings or memories. When you wake, your skin prickles with sweat, and you wonder whether you yourself are just another statue waiting to crack. There is a story you cannot forget. It is told by sailors who came from the east, men with salt still on their beards. They say that in Antioch, a colossal statue of Apollo toppled without wind or earthquake, crushing its own temple. The people wailed, believing it a sign of their city's doom. Within the year, fire consumed half the district, and famine gnawed the rest. When the tale reached Rome, even hardened legionaries crossed themselves. You listened in silence, knowing how easily faith and fear become indistinguishable. The worst part is not the tears or the blood. It is the silence that follows. When a statue cracks, the city holds its breath. Conversations stop in mid-sentence. Even laughter feels obscene. The marble does not explain itself. The gods do not send messengers. You are left with emptiness, forced to fill it with your own terror. That is when omens are most powerful, not when they speak, but when they refuse to. You remember the day you stood before the colossal Jupiter, on the Capitoline Hill. His eyes were as blank as ever, his face a mask of power carved by human hands. Yet you swore you saw moisture glint on his cheek, as if he, too, was weary of Rome's endless hunger. You blinked, and the tear was gone. You told yourself it was sunlight, nothing more. But your chest tightened with unease, because you knew how stories begin with one man's doubt, with one pair of eyes that swears to have seen. Tomorrow it could be 100 voices, and by the end of the week the whole city would be braced for doom. In Rome, marble is never just marble. Every block, every column, every statue is a stage where gods and men blur together. You know that emperors commission their likenesses not only to be remembered, but to be worshipped. If their statues bleed, it is not stone that fails, it is the empire itself. You realize this, standing among the crowd, hearing the murmurs tighten like rope. The gods are displeased. The end is near. Something must give. You think of the augurs, those interpreters of signs. They cut open birds, study entrails, trace patterns in ash. But when statues weep, even they falter. You saw one once, a man of high office, collapse to his knees before a cracked effigy. His face blanched, his lips moved soundlessly. You realized then that knowledge offers no shield against awe. The body trembles, the spirit recoils, and even the wisest are as children again. You are haunted most by the thought that maybe the statues do feel, that maybe the gods carved themselves into stone as vessels, peering through unblinking eyes at your every act, that when they cry, it is because they see too much, see Rome's cruelty, Rome's hunger, Rome's decayant despair. It chills you more than any battlefield, more than any plague, to imagine gods mourning what men have built. One evening, as you walk through a deserted forum, you hear it, a faint sound, almost like water trickling. You turn, heart hammering, and there it is, a statue of Diana, the huntress, her cheek streaked with what looks like liquid silver. Moonlight glistens on it, and your breath stops. You cannot move, you cannot think. The world narrows to that single drop of light against stone. Then a breeze stirs, and the liquid dries, leaving nothing but cold marble. You stagger away, shaken, wondering whether you saw anything at all. And still you carry it, with you the certainty that Rome's statues will never remain silent forever. They will cry, they will bleed, they will collapse, and each time the city will shudder. You walk among them as among gods in disguise, afraid that at any moment they might wake, because in Rome nothing is truly dead, not even stone. You think ashes are silence. You imagine that once the flames die and the smoke clears, what's left behind is only dust mute, lifeless, incapable of protest. But Rome teaches you otherwise. In this city, ashes whisper. They cling to your sandals, coat your lungs, and drift across your skin like a reminder that something or someone was reduced to this fragile gray powder. And if you're quiet enough, you can almost hear them breathing. The first time you feel it is when you're sweeping the courtyard of a collapsed insula. The fire that tore through the neighborhood weeks earlier has long been smothered, but the ground still exhales black soot when disturbed. Each sweep of your broom stirs a faint hiss, like a word you can't quite catch. The neighbors say not to work at dusk. That's when the ashes speak loudest. They warn, but you shrug it off, pretending you don't care, because you have rent to pay. And yet, when you pause, leaning on the broom handle, the sound is unmistakable. It's a silo, lingering, almost human. The old women say it's the main knees, the spirits of the dead, tethered to what's left of their bodies. Romans never believed fire erased a person. Cremation was a ritual, a translation of flesh into smoke that rose heavenward, and of bone into ash that sank earthward. Two halves of the same journey. But when the fire wasn't sacred, when it came by accident or by rage, the spirits didn't ascend. They clung, they lingered, they whispered. You wonder if that's why certain alleys are avoided, why certain ruins are left untouched. It isn't just fear of collapse, it's fear of voices. Ashes carry memory, and memory unburied becomes dangerous. You sit one night outside the Subura, in a tavern dark with wine fumes, when a bricklayer tells you about working in Nero's golden house after it burned. He swears the walls bled soot that shaped itself into faces. Whole crews abandoned their chisels, unwilling to strike another stone for fear it would scream. The city called them cowards. He calls them wise. Ashes don't rest, he mutters, tracing a circle on the table with his cup. They whisper back when you touch them. You laugh, nervously, but you drink faster. The stories grow thicker the longer you stay in Rome. You hear of bakers who refuse to reopen ovens after a fire, claiming the smell of burnt flesh never fades. Of children who stir up street dust and then shriek, claiming the grains form words. Of men who dream of choking smoke, only to wake with soot on their tongues. You begin to believe the city is less of marble and more of residue, an accumulation of all that has burned before. You feel it most during festivals. The parentalia in February, when families gather at tombs to honor the dead, turns the air into a haze of offerings. Ashes mingle with incense, and the prayers of the living blend with whispers of the departed. You bring a token bread dipped in winebud. As you set it down on an urn, you swear you hear your own name breathed back at you. No one else seems to notice, but you stagger, chilled. By now, you no longer mock the warnings. You walk differently through the city. You avoid kicking at dust. You hold your breath when the wind lifts cinders into your face, because you know some part of you knows that those ashes aren't inert. They remember, they accuse, and in their drifting silence, they speak louder than any living voice. One afternoon, you help clear rubble near the Circus Maximus, where another blaze gutted rows of stalls. You shovel blackened debris into baskets, dumping it outside the city gates. Your partner, a broad-shouldered laborer, spits and curses, saying Rome will always burn, so why bother clearing it? You don't answer, because you've heard it again. Not a hiss this time, a chorus, faint, layered, like hundreds of voices, overlapping, pleading, singing, accusing. You glance at him, but he seems deaf to it. Only you hear it, and that terrifies you. That night, sleep abandons you. You lie awake, hearing faint crackles in your walls, like embers reigniting. The ashes aren't outside anymore. They're here. In your blanket seams, in your hair, inside your chest. You cough, and a gray fleck lands on your hand. It shimmers in the lamplight. For a moment, you think you see an eye within it. You remember something your grandmother said long ago. The earth doesn't swallow everything. Some things linger to remind us what we've done. At the time, you laughed. Now, lying awake with ash on your tongue, you wonder if Rome itself is a reminder. A city built on smoke and rubble, thriving by pretending it forgets, while the ashes never stop whispering back. The next morning, you go to the Tiber to wash. You plunge your hands into the water. But even here, you're not safe. Ash floats on the current, thin gray films that catch sunlight like oil. They swirl around your wrists, clinging. You scrub harder, but the more you try to wash them off, the more you feel the weight of those whispers. They've soaked into you. They're part of you now. And you realize with horror that maybe the whispers aren't coming from outside at all. Maybe the ashes are only awakening something already in you. Memory, guilt. The echo of countless voices that built this city, suffered for it, died in its flames. You're not hearing them, you're remembering them. Your lungs, your blood, your very body has been breathing in the dust of Rome for years. You are their tomb, their archive, their unwilling priest. The thought shakes you, but then it steadies you. If ashes whisper back, maybe it isn't only curse. Maybe it's testimony, proof that no fire, no emperor, no cruelty can erase what has been lived. The whispers may haunt, but they also preserve. Rome may want you to forget. The ashes refuse to let you. So you rise, walk back through the city with gray dust in your hair. And when someone tells you to sweep it off, you don't. You let it stay. You let it whisper, because silence is the real death. And you'd rather carry the weight of their murmurs than walk clean and deaf through a city built on forgetting. And as you pass through the forum, where senators boast of victories and emperors carve their names into stone, you smile bitterly. The marble will crumble, the statues will fall, but the ashes, they'll keep whispering long after all of this is gone. You had thought death was silent, but Rome never let its dead sleep quietly. The living tugged at their sleeves, pulled them from beneath the earth, and seated them once again at the table. It was not enough that their names were carved into stone, or that the ashes of their bodies sat sealed in urns. Rome believed the dead were hungry, and so the living fed them. It was in February, when the parentalia came, that you first understood what it meant to sit at a feast for the dead. The city itself seemed to soften. Even magistrates laid down their insignia. No trials, no weddings, no wars were begun. The gates of the temples were shut tight, not because the gods had nothing to say, but because Rome feared that if the living did not speak with the dead, then the dead would speak louder still. You were led beyond the city walls, where the necropolis sprawled like another Rome's streets of tombs, monuments as proud as villas, but hollow, stuffed with ashes and bones. At nightfall, the lamps glimmered among the marble, so that the dead appeared to keep their own vigil. Families came carrying baskets of bread, garlands of violets, bowls of grain, pitchers of wine, and jars of honey. Not offerings left to decay untouched, but food to be shared. You sat cross-legged on the damp ground, shoulder to shoulder with the living, but every glance reminded you that half the company was not of flesh. Children traced names carved on stone, whispering them as though repeating a charm. Old women pressed crumbs of bread into cracks in the tombs, as if feeding the lips of someone trapped beneath. Fathers tipped wine slowly into the soil until it glistened like blood, and mothers drizzled honey so that the grave itself became sticky with sweetness. You ate, too. The bread was coarse and smelled of smoke, the wine sour and watered. But when you swallowed, you could not shake the thought that you were swallowing on behalf of someone who no longer could. Every bite seemed to catch in your throat, as though another mouth was tugging on it from within. Rome had no shame about binding its living to its dead. Here, the banquet was a contract. Break bread with them, or they would come scratching at your doors in the dark. The parentalia was meant to keep the shades content, but the real fear came after the ferelia. when Rome gave the dead their due in full. That night the city lay hushed, lanterns dimmed, children kept indoors. Families gathered again among the tombs, but the mood was different. Not remembrance, but appeasement. Wine was spilled, bread crumbled, incense burned so heavily that the necropolis smoldered like a battlefield after slaughter. Priests muttered charms that tasted of ash on your tongue. And still, Rome knew it was not enough, for the dead did not stay put unless watched. You heard stories whispered as the embers faded of shades that rose when their rites were neglected. A father who appeared to his daughter in dreams, teeth still clenched around the coin he had been denied for Charon's ferry. A child's laughter echoing down a villa corridor, though the child's bones had long been dust. One tale told of a soldier whose ghost rattled the chains of his armor until his sons poured out wine at his grave, and only then did the clamor cease. At the feast, you began to understand that death was not an end in Rome, but a negotiation. The tomb was a dining table, the urn a drinking vessel, the grave a contract signed in crumbs and spilled wine. The living fed the dead not because they loved them, but because they feared what might happen if hunger drove them back. And as you chewed, you asked yourself, which was more terrifying, that the dead might truly sit with you in the dark, sipping from the same cup, tugging bread from your hands, or that the living invented all of this feast's rites, offerings not because the dead demanded it, but because the living could not bear the silence of those they had lost. When the night deepened and the lamps guttered low, you watched a mother lean her head against her child's tomb. She whispered into the stone, though no sound came back. Then she tore her loaf of bread in half and left it there, a broken body for a broken child. You could not eat after that. Every mouthful seemed like theft, every swallow a betrayal. Later, walking back into the city, you smelled the smoke of torches and the sour temps of spilled wine in the gutters. Dogs prowled among the shadows, licking at honey smeared on stone. The living were gone, but the feast lingered, sticky and pungent. You wondered if the shades had eaten their fill, or if they waited still, crouched in the dark corners of the necropolis, lips wet, teeth sharp, hungry for what the living had not given. The feast of shadows was over, but the contract remained. Rome had reminded you, the dead were never finished with the living. You could bury their bodies, burn their ashes, carve their names into marble. But unless you fed them, unless you remembered them with every crumb and drop of wine, they would rise again, not in flesh, but in memory, sharpened into accusation. And so you walked home uneasy, stomach full, yet hollow, knowing that every loaf you broke might one day be broken for you. You think you have seen every form of death Rome can muster. The bloated corpses dragged from alleys, the anonymous pits filled at dawn, the careful layering of patrician tombs that try to disguise rot with marble and incense. But then comes the death of an emperor, and suddenly the city convulses into something entirely different. Death is no longer shameful, hidden, or practical. It becomes theater, ritual, spectacle. For the first time, you see what it means to watch a mortal body publicly transformed into something divine. When word spreads that the emperor has died, Rome doesn't grieve quietly. It hums like a hive. Senators don their stiffest togas, soldiers polish armor that hasn't gleamed since campaigns past, and commoners pour into the streets because even in death, the emperor is the sun, and you are a planet forced to orbit. You are swept along with the tide of bodies, drawn toward the Campus Martis, where the funeral pyre is being built. It isn't a pyre, the way you know them from soldiers' burials or pauper fires. No, this is a mountain of architecture, a tiered tower rising so high you have to crane your neck to take it in. Each layer is more ornate than the last, draped in cloth faux gold, heavy silks, purple banners fluttering in the August breeze. Perfumes are poured in jars, oils stacked like amphorae for war. Precious ivory is nailed to the beams, and garlands of flowers imported from provinces you will never see hang in thick ropes over the wooden skeleton. If death normally smells of rot and smoke, here it reeks of myrrh, frankincense, and the strange, heavy sweetness of spices that should have flavored feasts, not corpses. Some say it is fitting. After all, Rome must show that its emperor is no ordinary man. You can simply let him decay like a fishmonger in Trastevere or a slave beaten in an alley. The city has to believe he rises above them, even in death. The pyre is built like a ladder to the gods themselves. And yet, you notice, beneath the silks and perfume, it is still just wood. Still tinder waiting for flame. The body is paraded first. You hear the trumpets before you see it. The Praetorians march with grim faces, their shields polished, their helmets flashing like suns in the daylight. Behind them comes the bier, borne by magistrates with trembling arms. The emperor lies stiff, robed in imperial purple, a golden mask pressed over his face so that even in death he appears calm, eternal. But you know too well what lies under that mask. Flesh slackening, gases forming. The body is no less vulnerable to the same worms that gnaw at paupers. Only here, Rome refuses to acknowledge it. Crowds press against the lines of soldiers. Some weep loudly, tearing their garments as though grief has consumed them. Others cheer, voices breaking with devotion. Children are lifted onto shoulders, so they will remember this day, because they are witnessing not a death, but an ascension. You, jostled among them, can help but see the cruelty that one man's death requires so much ritual, while the city's gutters still run with unnoticed blood. The bier is carried up the pyre, step by step, until the emperor's corpse rests in the highest chamber, surrounded by treasures, statues, ivory carvings, bowls of jewels. It is a tomb that will not endure. All of it, his flesh, his wealth, his symbols of eternity, will be reduced to ash in a matter of hours. Rome knows this, and yet it believes in the performance. A hush falls as the pyre is lit. You can hear the crackle of torches, the sudden exhale of fire as dry timber catches. Flames leap hungrily, swallowing silks and garlands in moments. Heat lashes across the faces of the crowd, forcing you to shield your eyes. The perfumes burn, releasing clouds of sweetness so thick they choke you, mixing with the harsher temps of resin and smoke. And somewhere within it, the emperor's body begins to cook. The crowd doesn't recoil, they cheer. Senators raise their arms to the sky. Priests chant words you can't hear over the roar of fire. A great eagle is released from a gilded cage, its wings beating frantically as it soars upward, fleeing the inferno. The people shout as one, voices hoarse with ecstasy. The emperor's soul is carried by that bird, lifted beyond smoke and flame, into the heavens, into the ranks of the gods. You watch the eagle vanish into the brightness of the day. For a moment, you almost believe it. The heat, the chanting, the waves of human devotion, it creates an illusion strong enough to bend reason. But then your eyes sting, your throat burns, and you realize that no matter how much perfume they pour, beneath it all is just the same truth. A corpse is burning. The flesh bubbles, the bones crack, the emperor's grandeur devoured by fire, exactly as a beggar's would be. Still, the ritual does its work. By the time the pyre collapses inward, sparks soaring like stars, the crowd has been convinced. They have witnessed not decay, but divinization. Rome does not mourn the emperor. Rome cheers his new status, a god who will join the constellations, who will watch from above, whose temples will rise from the ashes even as his body falls to dust. You stand there, sweat and smoke clinging to your skin, and you think of the other deaths you've seen, the silent, hidden ones in alleys and fields, bodies dragged without a name or a witness. They rot without perfume, without ritual, without even a bird to mark their passing. Yet somehow you think their deaths are closer to truth. Here, the emperor's funeral pyre is less about the man and more about the city's need to believe. Rome must lie to itself, must mask the stench of mortality with spectacle. Because if even an emperor can rot, then what hope is left for anyone? As the last beams crash inward and the final flames consume the treasures, you feel the paradox gnawing at you. Rome has built a theater of immortality, but you, who have smelled death up close, know better. The gods may receive his name, but the worms will always claim his flesh. You think you've grown numb to it, the endless parade of bodies, the way they collapse into each other like sacks of discarded grain, the stench that seeps into your skin no matter how hard you scrub afterward. You tell yourself it's routine, mechanical, just another shift on the cart. You pick them up, you stack them, you carry them away, that's all. And yet, every so often you are forced to stop because a face refuses to let you move on. It's the eyes, most often. Clouded, filmed with that thin, milky glaze that tells you all the fire has gone out, yet still uncanny in their direction. You swear they look at you, they pin you as you stoop to lift the body, as though they've been waiting to meet your gaze. The first time it happened, you laughed, a nervous bark that startled even you. But as the nights have dragged on, as the piles have grown higher, that laughter has died. You've started averting your own eyes, as if breaking some unspoken contract. You don't want to be seen, not by them. Tonight is one of those nights. You're working in silence. Even the other collectors are too weary to mutter curses or jokes. You bend down in the dark of an alley, lantern light spilling over a collapsed figure in a ragged tunic. Just another corpse, you think. Just another husk. You hook your hands under the armpits, bracing to haul it up, and then the head tilts toward you. The face catches the light. The jaw slackens, revealing teeth that look too human, too familiar. The those damn eyes fix on yours. Clouded though they are, there's still something behind them, something you can't name. Not life, not really, but not empty either. The stare is sticky, insistent, clinging. It makes you forget to breathe. You whisper under your breath, "Don't look at me." And yet you keep staring back, because you can't help it. Because some part of you knows this is the truth of the plague knot, the statistics shouted in the marketplace. Not the edicts from the palace, not even the trenches filled with writhing heaps. No, the truth is one face. A face that could have been laughing yesterday, that could have been complaining about bread prices, that could have been your neighbor, your brother, your reflection. The longer you look, the more you notice the details. The way the skin has tightened at the temples, the faint shadow of beard stubble, a cut above the eyebrow that looks recent, like they fell when the fever took them. And you realize that the last thing this person ever saw was probably not their family, not a priest, not even the sky but the uneven stones of this filthy street. And now their last sight is you. You try to turn away, but the thought festers. One day, this will be your face. It sneaks into your mind uninvited, as persistent as the flies buzzing at your ears. Someday, someone else will lean down, hook their hands under your armpits, and grunt as they drag your weight. They'll see your jaw hanging open, your eyes fogged over, and maybe they'll feel it too, that strange connection, that chilling recognition, the circle completing itself. That thought rattles you more than any mound of corpses. The piles blur into anonymity. You can pretend they're just objects. But one face, a single face, forces you to admit what you already know. This isn't an abstract plague. This isn't Rome. This isn't the people. It's you, waiting in the alley for someone else's hands. Your grip falters. For a heartbeat, you consider leaving this one, walking away. But you can't not, because of duty, not because of orders, but because the eyes won't let you. They've chosen you. They've made you complicit in their last moment of presence. And so, with a shudder, you finish what you started. You drag the body up, hoist it onto the cart, and in the jostling, the head rolls to the side. The eyes lose you, finally staring at nothing. Relief floods through you, but it feels hollow, as if you've betrayed something sacred. You glance at the heap already growing in the cart. Dozens of faces, some buried, some half visible. They blur together in your vision until you force yourself not to look. But you know that at least one will stay with you. You'll see it when you lie down later, when you close your eyes, when sleep is too thin to shield you. It will return, patient and watchful. It occurs to you that this is what makes body collecting unbearable. Not the stench, not the weight, not the risk of infection. It's the intimacy. You can't avoid it. The baker's apprentice may pass the day without seeing a corpse. The senator may issue decrees without ever smelling the rot. But your work, demands you meet death's gaze directly, night after night, face after face, until you are convinced that the last face you'll ever see will not belong to a loved one, nor even to yourself in some polished reflection, but to a stranger already halfway gone, daring you to recognize them. And once you do, you can't unsee it. You tell yourself to keep moving. You tell yourself not to think, but the thought repeats itself in rhythm with your steps, the wheels of the cart squealing in time. Someday this will be you. Someday this will be you. You grip the cart handle tighter, as though you can steer yourself away from the inevitable. But in your gut, you know you've already seen the last face. It's every face. It's all of them, blurred into one endless stare. And the worst part, you can't decide if you fear it, or if some twisted part of you has started to welcome it. It is not dramatic when death arrives, not like in the stories the priests used to tell, with thunder and visions and fiery angels descending to carry away the faithful. No, when it comes for you, it comes quietly. The first cough feels ordinary, no more than the scratch of dust from the dry roads. The ache in your joints could easily be explained by a day too long spent heaving bodies into pits. But by the second night, when the sweat will not stop pouring and your head burns as if a coal has been placed inside it, You know, in the deep, terrible way a man who has handled too many corpses comes to know. You have seen the look in the others, that peculiar glaze in the eyes when they are still alive, but already belong more to death than to life. You do not even bother denying it. You lie on the straw pallet in the corner of your room. The smell of rot that clings to your skin and clothes, now indistinguishable from the sickness rising within you. Your tongue is thick, your throat dry, and yet nothing quenches it. Your chest tightens, a heaviness that makes each breath an effort. When you reach for the cup at your bedside, your hand trembles so badly you spill half of it. You think of all the times you watched others shake like this, and you remember how short the time was between tremor and stillness. The city outside does not notice. Why would it? You are one of thousands. The carts still roll in the streets. The bells still toll, hollow and relentless, their sound carrying through the alleys. Even if your neighbors hear your coughing, they will not come. Who would risk stepping inside the house of a body collector? You were already untouchable in life. In sickness, you were cursed twice over. And so, your death begins as your work always began, alone. By the third day, the buboes have risen, black and hard beneath your skin. You do not need a mirror to know they bloom like dark fruit along your armpits and groin. You have lifted enough bodies to feel them in others. Now you feel them in yourself. The pain is indescribable, deep, as if a claw is hooked into your flesh and tearing from the inside. Each touch sends lightning through your body. You remember the cries of the dying, their gasps and whimpers. Now you understand they were holding back, that the noise you thought unbearable was restraint compared to the storm of fire and knives that courses through your own blood. You dream in snatches when the fever allows. In one dream, you are back on the carts, heaving bodies. But this time, they all have your face. 100 versions of you, pale, swollen, each staring blankly as you drag them into the pit. In another, you lie at the bottom of a trench, but when you try to climb out, the corpses pull you back with bony fingers, whispering in voices that sound like your own. You wake, gasping, throat raw, heart racing. For a moment, you almost wish you had not woken at all. When the knock comes, you are too weak to answer. You hear it distantly, like the echo of stones on wood. Then voices, muffled. The door creaks. Footsteps enter. The collectors, your collectors. The men you once called brothers in toil, though never in friendship. You imagine their faces, grim, tired, lined with the same dirt you wore for years. Do they pause when they see you lying there? Or is it easier now, because you are only one more among the thousands they lift each day? You want to ask, you want to speak, to tell them you understand, that you forgive them for the roughness of their hands. But no words come, only a wet rattle in your throat. A shadow leans over you, and then you feel the rope tighten around your ankles. So this is how it ends. You remember every time you tied those ropes yourself, muttering apologies to the still faces that would never hear them. Now the hemp bites into your own skin. You are tugged, your body scraping against the floorboards. Then over the threshold, the street greets you not as a man but as cargo. The world tilts as they lift you onto the cart, dropping you among the others. The stench is overwhelming, sweet, foul, and familiar. It is the smell you carried home every night of your working life. You thought yourself numb to it, but now it invades every corner of your dying breath. The cart lurches forward. Wheels rattle, hooves clop. You are jostled against limbs and torsos, the dead pressing against you like companions. Once, you were the one walking beside this wagon, calling for doors to open, for bodies to be brought out. You remember the children peeking from shutters, the way mothers pulled them back in fear of your touch. Now you ride where the silence lives. As the city passes by above you, you wonder if anyone sees, if someone looks down from a window and notices your face among the heap. Would they recognize you? The man who knocked on their door last week? The man who once hauled away their cousin, their neighbor, their son? Or do you already blur into the mass, another nameless form on the cart of shadows? The road turns rougher as you approach the edge of the city. The familiar path, the pits, you know every stone, every rut, for you walked this route countless times with the whip of duty at your back. The bells fade here, replaced by the cries of crows and the buzzing of flies. And then the smell intensifies. The trench yawns before you, darker and deeper than any grave a single man might claim. Hands grip you again. The rope pulls. You are dragged over the edge. The sky appears above you for one brief moment, a slab of pale gray. Then you fall. You land not on earth, but on flesh. The softness of others cushions your descent. You are not the first, and you will not be the last. The weight of another soon presses onto you, forcing air from your chest. You cannot move. You do not try. This is the place you made for others, the resting ground you filled day after day. It is fitting, perhaps, that you now take your place here. The trench accepts you without ceremony. No prayer, no candle, no name written in a ledger. Only the sound of earth beginning to fall, shovelful after shovelful, muffling the cries of the crows and the groan of the city beyond. Darkness closes in, heavy and absolute. And as the soil presses down, you realize the truth that every collector before you must have realized in their final moment. You were never different, never spared, never chosen by anything more than the cruel lottery of time. You spent your life lifting the forgotten into the pit, but in the end, the pit remembers everyone. It swallows kings and beggars, mothers and children, sinners and saints, body collectors and the bodies they collected. No one walks forever beside the cart. Eventually, everyone rides. And so, your work ends as it began, with silence. You, too, are gone. You are gone now, though no priest marked your passing, no family claimed your body, no bell tolled in your honor. The city simply swallowed you, the way it did thousands of others. Somewhere, beneath a mound of hurriedly tossed soil, your bones lie stacked with the same people you once carried. There is no marker to tell anyone you existed. Yet strangely, in this silence, you remain. Not as flesh or breath, but as an echo, a whisper, carried in the dust that settles over the plague pits, in the broken timbers of the carts that rot where they were abandoned. You are a presence that lingers in the streets, in the corners of ruined churches, in the very stones of the walls that outlasted you. The survivors do not speak of you. They remember plague, famine, terror, and fire, but the body collectors are written only as shadows, if at all. You were too ugly to be remembered properly, too necessary to be honored. You did the work no one else could, and in that, you erased yourself. But the silence is not empty. It is heavy, dense, a silence that tells its own story. Centuries from now, scholars will argue about numbers. Chronicles will exaggerate or diminish. Poets will reach for metaphors of death and night, and none of them will know what it was to take another man's child by the arms, lift him into a cart, and feel the boy's head roll loosely against your shoulder. None of them will know the sound of a mother's scream as you pried her fingers away. Only you knew, and you carried that knowing into the pit with you. And yet, perhaps that is the truest form of remembrance. Not names on stone, not prayers in churches, but the weight of the unseen. For even if the city forgets, the silence remembers, and the silence is yours. The city grows again. Children chase one another down alleys where you once dragged carts of the dead. Bakers knead dough in ovens once cold, and merchants spread bright fabrics across stalls as though cloth could outshine memory. Laughter rises where screams once filled the air, as though nothing ever happened, as though you were never there, but beneath their feet you remain. Your bones, and the bones of those you carried, lie stacked in darkness, hidden under layers of earth and stone. When new foundations are dug, the shovels sometimes scrape against a skull. Work halts for a moment. The laborers glance at one another, then toss the fragment aside and continue. The city cannot stop for ghosts. Still, the dead are never truly silent. In dreams, the living feel your presence. They sense it in the sudden hush of a square at dusk, in the strange unease of passing by an empty churchyard, in the whispers of rats scurrying in shadows. They do not know why their hearts quicken, why the hairs on their arms rise, but you do. It is the memory of you, buried but not erased, pressing upward through time. The city thrives above your grave, but it thrives because of it. Your silence is its foundation, your absence its unseen scaffolding. You were forgotten so that life could go on. That is the cruelest truth of all. The world only survives by forgetting you. You are not alone in history. You are only one shadow in a long procession of shadows, each bent under the weight of other people's survival. In every age, there have been body collectors, though they were not always called by that name. In Rome, they dragged the fevered into pits when plague hollowed the empire. In Constantinople, they hauled corpses down marble steps, slick with rain and blood. In London, centuries from your time, men with carts marked by red crosses would knock on doors and carry away the wasted ballot. And in cities yet to be built, other hands will lift other bodies during other outbreaks, while the world whispers the same word: contagion. The living remember emperors, kings, poets. They carve statues for generals, write hymns for saints, build towers for merchants. But the hands that carried the world through its filth, the ones that kept the streets from choking with the dead, are left unnamed. The recorders of history do not trouble themselves with the names of gravediggers. Yet, without you, all of you, no city could have risen again. Without the hands that touched the untouchable, the survivors would have drowned in their own dead. The weight you bore is the weight that allowed life to continue. Every city is built on such hands. Every story is raised on such silence. If you remember me, even for the length of this sentence, then I am not entirely lost. That is all I ever wanted, less than a grave, less than a prayer, just a flicker in the mind of someone living, someone breathing, someone who does not have to wade through the rot of their neighbors. The church bells tolled when kings died, streets wept when merchants passed. But when men like me fell, no one rang the bells, no one lit a candle. Our bodies were dragged by others who wore our same torn cloaks, who whispered the same small prayers to no one in particular. And then we were stacked among those we had carried, indistinguishable from the burden we once bore. But now you have walked beside me, haven't you? You have smelled the smoke of my torch, felt the wheel of my cart bump against uneven stones, and heard the quiet ache of my back as it bent again and again. You have stood in my shadow. If you remember me, then for a moment my labor is not wasted. For a moment the silence that swallowed me is broken. And if you carry me forward, then I am not only a body collector, I am a witness. Now you step away from me. You place the torch down, the cart behind, and you walk back into your own life. You will wash your hands without lie, and no stench will cling to you. You will see the sky unclouded by smoke, and no crow will circle above your roof. You will return to laughter, to bread still warm, to the ordinary rhythm of breath. But know this, you cannot unhear what I have whispered. You cannot unknow the weight I bore, the silence I lived inside. When you close your eyes tonight, you may feel the pull of the cart in your shoulders. You may hear the hollow sound of wood on stone as another body falls into place. That is my gift to you, though it may not feel like one. Memory is a curse, yes, but it is also proof that the forgotten once lived. I did not dream of legacy, only of being seen. And now you have seen me. Do not pity me, do not weep for me. Only remember me, and tell the world that I was here that once. There was a man who carried the dead through a silent city, and in doing so, carried a part of you as well. I vanish, but you remain, and so I endure. You have walked through shadowed streets and narrow alleys with me, bearing the weight of silence and loss. The journey has been heavy, not because the bodies themselves pressed upon your shoulders, but because of what they represented. Every life extinguished, every story silenced before it could finish. Yet, as you reach the end, pause, allow yourself a breath, for even in the telling of death, there is life. What you've carried across these pages is not only horror, though it wore that mask. You've carried resilience. You've carried the stubborn will of people who lit candles against endless night. You've carried the truth that even when the world crumbles, someone remains to remember. And in that remembering, there is dignity. The plague stripped away illusions of power, wealth, and permanence. But it also revealed a raw, undeniable truth that we are bound to one another. The body collector was not a hero, not a villain only, a man caught in necessity. A man who did what must be done when others could not bear to look, and though his labor ended centuries ago, his voice still reaches you, asking not for pity, but for remembrance. Perhaps that is the lesson you carry forward. To remember what is easy to forget, to honor the overlooked, to grant a name, even silently, to those who had none. Because the past is not only dusted, is a mirror. And in that mirror, you see yourself reflected, fragile, mortal, yet still capable of choosing mercy. When you close this book, the noise of the world will return. You may set the story aside, but fragments will linger. A cartwheel turning on stone, a torch flickering against a wall, the faint hum of a voice speaking in the dark. These are not burdens, but threads, binding you across time to a man who once walked alone among the dead. And so, let this final silence be not an end, but a resting place. Step away, breathe deeply, and carry forward the simplest truth that even in history's darkest hours, the act of remembering becomes an act of light.